Okay, first question, Mel, that I have. It's a little bit of story too, because I haven't talked about this with Andrew, I don't think. But um, Kat has a passion for education, and she worked in like ed tech, and she's really great at it. And she decided to take a sabbatical and kind of think about what she wants next in her job, and to be really, really mindful of the kind of work she does, which I've just been really supportive of and really excited. It's been cool to watch her like really mindfully think through where she wants to invest so much of her time and energy, right? And at one point, a school, or maybe multiple schools in San Francisco, reached out and offered her like, "Hey, can you come and be like a principal? Like, can you come and like work at the school?" Pretty cool opportunity. And then we were having our own private conversation, right? We're talking about getting married. All these things are moving that way. It's getting very exciting. And we live together. So then it's like, oh wow, this is like one of our first like oh shit conversations that you have with a partner, where you're like, should we consider moving to San Francisco? We both really like our lives in Los Angeles like a lot. How do we feel about the city? And Mel lives in San Francisco, Andrew, which is part of the reason is the reason I'm sharing this anecdote. And we took some time and we thought about it. And on my end, I was like, if this is a dream job for you, if this is something that you're so excited about and can't believe that it's like that this offer came across, I would totally try living there. I don't have anything against San Francisco, especially if it's something that's like a huge thing for you. And then we kind of came to this point where the job wasn't necessarily a dream job or a dream fit. And San Francisco was as amazing as some of the people we've met and things about San Francisco. We also really, really love our life in Los Angeles that we're building. But during that week, before we had okay, I don't think we're going to say yes to this particular opportunity. I don't think we're moving. I was like, maybe I should listen to some podcasts or watch some YouTubes. Like, what's San Francisco like the past year or two? And oh my God, Mel, it is so polarizing. There's like I couldn't find anybody in between. I couldn't find anybody nuanced, which is what I was looking for, which I guess kind of makes sense because nuance isn't as clickable, maybe it doesn't drive as much
Yeah.
traffic. But I was really only like, AI is creating the next revolution of San Francisco and a rebirth all over again of everything in SF that's going to be incredible for the future. And then like on the other side was like all apocalyptic and like why San Francisco is like the cancer of the country. And I was like, oh my God. So, without pressure, because I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of all of San Francisco, because I know that's insane, because it is. But I'm just curious if you fall in between there somewhere at all. If there's any nuance that you bring to as somebody that isn't, you're not from San Francisco, but you've been there for how long?
Well, I'm from Fremont, which is very close
Okay, well
by.
then you
So
kind
I've
of are from
spent
San
like
Francisco. Okay.
yeah, I spent a lot of my childhood like going to the Exploratorium, going to the California Academy of Sciences, like going into the city and then going back home. But yeah, so I mean, I can provide like some perspective on the past year or two that I've spent here, which has been really
This perspective that feels like you want to share, like what
yeah.
actually wants to come out of Mel when you're thinking about what you love or don't love or anything in between about the city that you're living in.
Yeah. I think one thing, especially comparing it to like going directly from LA to SF, um, there's a really interesting like college campus feel to the city, like especially in the Lower Haight area near the Commons, which is the third space, and the center, which is sadly closing down,
What
which is
is the
really, really
center?
sad.
Is that
It's
another
like
third
this
space?
tea house, yoga, kind of like spiritual place that is also a third space, but it's not membership based.
Right.
Um, a fixture of the community, if you will. But like those places, you'll walk in and you'll see like five people you know, or you'll be like at a restaurant and you'll just like pass by and like you'll just see so many people. So in that way, it like really feels school campusy, which is really cool. Um, and that's something that is not really, at least I didn't really experience it in LA because everything's so far away from each other. Like I knew so many people in LA, but you'd have to drive like 20 or 30 minutes to go see them. Um, so the walkability is really, really cool. And there's a lot of intentionality behind people who are trying to build centers And like there's this guy named Jason Ben who's working on the neighborhood, which is supposed to be like a campus for people with group houses to like all live together. There's a really strong co-op community, which is also super cool. I was living in a group home for a little bit with like 13 other people called the Muse. um, and there's a lot of those randomly just scattered across the city. So that is part of the culture that I never really encountered in LA. I'm sure it's there in LA, but it is like a smaller location. So uh, things that happen, I feel like, take up a bigger percentage when you have like I forget what the word is, core mass.
I'm curious to Andrew. Do you know about third spaces or what third spaces are, or like what that term indicates?
No, when you said it, all I thought about was like WeWork. That's where my brain
Yeah,
went. But
it's kind of similar. Yeah, so I thought I would just cue you in, which is my favorite when Andrew and I literally don't know something that we bring somebody on about. But there's the idea is that, traditionally you go to your office or you go to where you work, right? And you go home, and these are like your like two main spaces that you operate in, right? And so this idea of like a third space that you could go to, and maybe that traditionally was Rotary clubs or YMCA or all these different your church, these different groups in like Americana, and as religion and religious groups and structures maybe have kind of declined, and other institutions have declined. It's what's going to take up that vacuum, of like finding purpose in community among people that we live around. And there's been some cool stuff happening where people are like, oh, let's just create third spaces again. Let's create places that are really just meant to be about building relationship and having more of a tie to where you live, like actually having some stakes in your neighborhood for the better. That's my quick 90-second try to explanation on it. How's that sound to you, Mel?
That sounds perfect. Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
literally a third
Yeah.
space,
So
which
there's a new one here in LA that
nowadays,
Kat and I joined that I liked. Oh no, go ahead, Mel.
oh, oh, I was just saying, like nowadays, that's the internet. But people are trying to build more physical third spaces because we've gone so digital with the third space that we're trying to bring it back to analog.
I think
so
that's a perfect way to say that. The internet has actually taken that vacuum up. So can we
Yeah,
create other places so it's not just the internet?
are those
exactly.
places curated? Not to turn this into a third space podcast, but are they like curated spaces, or are they just more like this is a community center where like-minded people can get together?
Are you part of one in San Francisco? Are you a member of any of the ones in San Francisco, Mel, or do you just stop into the ones that don't require membership? Or
Yeah, so the Commons is the main one. Joe was a member for quite a long time, and then I was a member for about a month. But then we moved somewhere that was kind of far, and the membership wasn't as worth it because it's based on like how often you go. I wouldn't say it's, well, depends how you define curated, but it is very like everyone shows up and there's a lot of intentionality, and they have these different like, they call it a very special term. Um, but it's like groups where you have like similar interests and you like come and talk about it. It's like they almost have curriculums for it too. So it's a really great way to like meet people who are interested in the same things that you are. Um, yeah. Yeah.
I freaking love third spaces. Like I really could talk a lot about it, but I'd like to do like a fun little like this is what I would do if we were at dinner. So, um, what is a dream third space look like to each of you? And it doesn't need to be
Ooh.
a fleshed out business plan, right? It's meant to just be like playing around, like shooting the shit. For example,
Yeah.
I really liked the idea of, yeah, I have kind of like a bookstore library vibe, but I also have like a cafe because I want coffee or whatever, um, and lots of plants and everything. But I like the idea of like in the back there's something else going on, whether it's like a tattoo studio or it's they're like remaking old vehicles or old cars, but there's huge soundproof windows up so you can like see in to the work that people are doing while also being able to like
Oh,
vibe and hang out
so cool.
on the front end, right? And then at night it can like turn into like an event space, have like cool non-alcoholic cocktail bar that's like speakeasy vibe, maybe like live music or whatever. But just like the thing I've always really enjoyed is creating a space where people don't want to leave, and that's why I've always been like fascinated too with like hotel lobbies and how you can like try
Mm,
to talk about that word curate, but like make somewhere where like you're just like you walk into it and you're like I could hang out here for like
mm,
a little bit. So that was my pitch on one is I don't know exactly what's in the back, but no, I'm just going to say I like the idea. So I love my Ford Bronco so much. I never drive it and I want to have it for like 40 years, but I love the idea of like old school Broncos being turned into like electric vehicles in the back, which I don't even think is possible, but like somehow they like convert it to like an electric Bronco, but it still has like the old classic look to it. And that kind of work's being done in the back and the front end. Like you have that vibe that I talked about. And so that's my third space. If you guys ever like want to come by and hang out, and every
I'm
once in a while we
in.
do karaoke nights and like old school video game tournaments, like hook up Xboxes and play Halo. Like physically have the Ethernet cables plugged into all the Xboxes so that we can play.
That's amazing.
Somebody give me theirs. I want to hear some things that are in your dream third space.
Go ahead.
I've actually thought about this a lot.
Yes.
um, I really want to do like a yoga cafe treehouse kind of vibe. A lot of plants, a lot of sun. Like have people come together and practice together, like move your body, some qigong in the mornings maybe, and then yeah, like cafe, good tea, elixirs. We just went to this place up in Sebastopol after my birthday called like Soft Medicine,
Happy
and they're
birthday.
just like, thank you. I mean,
Yeah, happy birthday.
it's in 10 days, but very soon. um, and they like make these elixirs, and they're so good, and it just feels like it's like a community. Like they have all sorts of like spiritual kind of woo stuff, but like I kind of like the woo stuff. So definitely like a little leaning woo. Yeah.
Can I tell you what I imagine for it though? I also imagine it's got huge, huge ceilings with huge trees inside of it that then break out above the ceiling so they can catch light, and so the
Oh.
ceiling's like molded around the tree, and with nooks built into the trees. So like tree houses, but like tree houses
Yeah.
for adults. Books Are Magic, which is one of my favorite bookstores I used to live next to in Brooklyn, and I lived there. When they first opened it, they had like these little nooks for kids so they could curl up in this like secret little hole and read a book, and it was like perfect and cozy and cute. And I was like, that for adults. So when you say tree style, it's like actually you can like climb up into these trees and have this
Yeah.
like tree vibe. Okay,
Like
so that's
jungle
my
gym,
yes,
like
that's what I'm
ropes
imagining.
and everything.
Exactly. Like you're just bringing back the like, hey, can we stop at the
So
McDonald's
good.
as a kid
Yeah,
so we can go to
literally.
the jungle gym, but I want to make it like, kind of sleek
Yeah.
and cool and
Vibey.
cozy. Vibey.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right, I'll start working on
I love
Yeah,
tree
yeah. Let me
houses
know.
so much.
it. You love tree houses so much?
Oh my god, there's so
Are you
like
building one right now in the
I
backyard?
wish. No, 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 no. Once I get a little bit more land, maybe. But that show Treehouse Masters, that's on like I don't know Outdoor TV, Discovery or something, is the most like nostalgic, whimsical. The guy that hosts it is just super funny. But they build the most incredible things inside of a tree that you would never
Wow.
imagine,
The
and it's
I
incredible.
keep
I love it.
forgetting to like mute myself when I start typing my keyboard, and then when I'm going through the editing process, I'm like, God, I'm such an amateur. You can hear me clicking, but it'll be fun because now when people hear it clicking, they'll know I'm googling Treehouse Masters to look at all the
Yeah, it's
images.
more
Oh
authentic.
my
Yeah,
god! And
it's
some
so
of this
fun.
stuff is nuts.
Yeah, the show is incredible. It's very very well done. Um,
Okay, your third space though, Andrew.
so mine would be based around a CSA, so community supported agriculture, and like when I was a kid, I remember my parents always had potlucks. Like that was like the thing. It's like the
Mm,
neighborhood would get together. We always rotated houses, and everybody would sort of bring the one dish that they were like, this is it. Like my mom made this like really weird casserole situation, and it had like the stupid little Tupperware thing that it came in that was always stained because the lid was all weird. But like doing something like that's like having like a community supported agriculture, but in a kitchen to where you're not having this like barrier between the farm, the actual preparation of the product, and then the community who's supporting it. But you can kind of bridge the gap, get everybody in there, and create this like dinner party. But you're connecting where the food comes from, who's consuming the food, who's preparing the food, and then tell the stories of everybody's food as they kind of come through. Because I feel like food is always like a really good connector of people, and it's a really good way to connect with who you are, your the foundations. Like my childhood is very rooted in food memory, even though it was very vanilla and basic food. There's still a lot of like very strong, very core things. And anytime I meet people that have a very different background than me, I love exploring what that looked like. Like what was in your lunchbox when you went to school, and how to facilitate that conversation in a space to me just seems like a really fun, exciting thing to do that I would love to, I don't know,
I don't
figure
want
out
to
at some point.
assume too much, but obviously, since you're like a chef and you're comfortable in the kitchen, does that extend to the idea that you'd have fun and be comfortable with deciding what's going to get planted outside, or what you would potentially have growing seasonally at the cool what was the
Yeah,
CSA?
CSA. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
community supported agriculture. So the way that that typically works right now is like you go to a farm, they show you this is everything that we grow. This is the seasonality of everything that we grow. And if you give us money at the beginning of the season, we will grow all of this, and you will get a portion of everything that we grow from our farm. And every week you come and pick it up at whatever farmers
Hmm.
market or whatever location, and then you get this giant basket or whatever bag of produce that spans their entire growing catalog for that year. And there's some really cool places here in Tennessee that do that. One of them is actually called Growing Together, where they bring people in who are fresh into this community from everywhere. I mean, they've got people from Nepal, they've got people from Indonesia. We've got there's a family that just moved in there from it's either Ecuador or Colombia. I can't remember, but they bring seeds from their home, and Growing Together gives them the space to not only grow this, but to give them an outlet to sell it, to generate income for their family and tell their story. And being able to connect that through the food, cooking the food, having it in front of people is just always something that's been awesome for me to think about. Never had a thing to put it on until I heard you guys talk about third spaces, which I think is incredible.
You're gonna keep thinking about it, and when you come to LA, I'll take you to the one that Kat and I joined and give you a tour. I'm
Yeah.
I'm hosting a few events. What am I hosting? It's all about the one that we joined is all about getting members to host things that they're specifically interested in, uh, and that's kind of like how it comes alive, right? So one of them is I just did a thank you card event. So literally, I bring postage
Oh,
and pens and some extra cards, and people come with just the idea of gratitude and like who is it that you want to write to, because we could all always come up with somebody that we like the idea of them going out to their mailbox and being like, wait, they sent me an actual card. And it's kind of like a lost art. But then like
I
also I
love
have
that.
like this fun video game one that I'm hoping gets approved for like a month from now, where the idea is if you love video games, you show up that night, you can dress up as your favorite video game. You can create a diorama. You can create a PowerPoint. But the idea is you're pitching everybody there on one video game you think they should play and why. And so once again, you're kind of getting everybody to almost like show and tell. And I think that's probably the idea that I would have for any third space, is that my like thumbprint on it would be, does this like bring an inner child alive? Is there like a silliness or a goofiness or just like a fun element that you're like, there's a lot of seriousness in the world, and that's great, and academia and all that, and I have a place for all that stuff, religiosity, spirituality, and I'm in all of that stuff. But like my thumbprint would just be like very much like a kid's, like adult but kid's spirit kind of coming through. Thanks, Mel. Thanks for, by the way, I stopped halfway through your answer of San Francisco to talk about the third space element, but I do think I think it's a cool some of that positive element that you're talking about as far as like a campus type feel. Lamern, that does sound really interesting and really cool, and it's kind of fun to think about. So I'm curious, any other like emotions or thoughts or feelings that you have about the city itself that you feel like sharing.
yeah. I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was like, I feel like the people talking about AI and tech is like, that is a big part of the city, but it's like a loud minority, you know? It's like people who are in that space are more likely to talk about it because like they're like very excited about it, you know? And there's also so much more to this city other than that. And so, yeah, I was like, at least for me, like, yeah, AI is, I don't know, especially like yesterday with the release of GPT 4.0. That was like everyone was talking about it on Twitter. But
Yeah,
at
I
the
made the
same time, there's
mistake of
also
liking.
like,
I made the mistake of liking one post
oh,
because
it's
it was like
over.
it was showing me like the 14 new things that
Yeah.
ChatGPT 4 can do, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll like this, and like click on it to see like, oh, I can like translate in real time or whatever. And then I swear immediately half of my feed was just the big threads on here's all the things that
Oh, God.
ChatGPT could do, and I was like, oh my god,
And then
She'll
all the
discredit
memes
you.
of like her is coming true and like
Yes, lots of her
you're
memes.
dating a model, blah blah
Lots
blah.
of her memes. So I interrupted you again, but I just yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
um, but yeah, I mean, those are. It's also like just beautiful the nature that you get access to. Like that is, yeah. As someone who like loves nature, like I was just up in Sebastopol this past week, and it was lovely. And then like you can just take like trips to Yosemite. You're close to the beach. Like
This
yeah,
happens
there's
with my
lots to love
dad
about
where
it.
because we're all from Florida. My dad's originally from Indiana, so his life's been lived in Indiana and in Florida, and he like wants to come and have this adventurous California spirit because like I'm out here now, and so he'll come and visit me and like
Oh,
let's see California. But I feel like half the time when he's suggesting stuff, he's just suggesting things that are absolutely in your area, like North California vibes, and not anywhere near me at all. And I'm like, yeah, no, that trail would be beautiful. It's going to take 8 hours to get there. We have to just meet in that city. So I feel like I don't know. Maybe I do just we need to just like knock out a huge SF trip with him so he can get all the nature he's idealizing in his head. That, but I by the way, I think the nature around LA is also stunning, but it's
for
obviously very
sure.
different. You know.
Yeah,
Um,
Joshua
well,
Tree.
thanks for like being down to talk about San Francisco a little bit, just because it's you're one of my favorite people that live in that city, and I don't have a feel for it, and I feel neither good or bad about that. Just like I just don't have a sometimes you just don't have a feel for a city, even if you've been there multiple times. So it's I always enjoy hearing what people love or maybe don't love as much about a place. But Andrew, I have to ask this, so thank you for letting me. I just wanted to know more about this thing that Mel had. I could tell that Mel was kind of getting pretty enthusiastic or pretty exciting, pretty deep into, I think, about Aletheia, like a practice called Aletheia. And I intentionally didn't research it or watch anything about it because the way you had talked about it briefly seemed like there was a lot of enthusiasm around it. And I was like, I want Mel to explain what this is to me and why they're vibing with it so much. Um, and Andrew and I both, I think we would fail if you gave us a quiz and asked us to say anything about it. So it's kind of fun. We're in the dark, but when anybody that you're close to gets really excited about something, I think that's one of the really fun parts of being like, all right, I'm gonna clear out. Like, floor is yours. Tell me what happened. Tell me why you're into this thing.
Mm. Yeah, this is a good practice in describing it because it's one of those things where that I find difficult to describe. But I'll start with like the reason why I love it so much and why it made such an impact on me is that a little bit of backstory. Um, I tried DMT for the first time in July of last year. We have now entered the psychedelic portion of this podcast. But oh yeah, even more backstory. I used to write a newsletter about psychedelics and everything. And I used to do a lot of psychedelics, especially around like mental health stuff, particularly psychedelics for mental health. And then I tried DMT. It was a very challenging experience. Um, and I basically stopped psychedelics cold after that. And when I first tried Aletheia, it was the first time I felt what it feels like to be on psychedelics, but like stone cold sober. So that is like the best um, description I can give
So
of it
Alithia
on a
is not a
high level.
psychedelic. It is a practice. It's
It
like
is a
a
practice,
meditative
yeah.
practice or
So it's like something. It's something you do with a coach, um, and it's
oh
a
okay,
like
it's
one-on-one
with somebody.
session.
Okay.
Yeah, they call it like co-mindfulness, and they're essentially helping you like see the different parts of you. So it's built on IFS, which is parts work, which I think you are familiar with, Charlie.
I
Um,
am, but Andrew is as well because we interviewed Purnab and it was a wonderful
oh,
conversation
nice.
and we kind of covered some of that as well. And similarly, we talked about how John has got do this similar thing as far as like they can get people to a place that when I heard how they described it to me, it reminded me of what it was like to do my ketamine assisted therapy. But I was obviously on ketamine, and with John is they're not on. anything. So this is now you're the second person that's mentioned something else that's creating that type of state without taking something.
Yes, exactly. Um, and I don't know how much overlap there is. I don't know that much about jhanas and how they work with you to get into that state, but I'm sure there's similarities. Um, but yeah, the basis of it is kind of working with whatever is coming up in your experience. So, like, and it's very somatic. So, it's like maybe your throat and
Somatics is
like
like in the body.
in
Is
the
like,
body.
yeah, okay.
So, like your throat and maybe like anxiety or like sadness that is there, or like jaw and anger that is there. And it's working with these sensations and whatever is present and welcoming them as they are. And it's a very, very simple, just like welcoming. And it sounds simple, but for a lot of people, for most people, it's difficult to do on your own because these are experiences that we typically try to um, push out of our awareness because it can be uncomfortable or scary or like, yeah, not everyone wants to feel deep grief all the time or
I don't
extreme
know about you,
anger.
Andrew. I have an immediate repressive reaction to crying. Like in my household,
Oh,
nobody
wow.
cried. My parents didn't cry, neither one of them. Even to this day, if I get them to talk about grief, something dark, like they push it away. And it was like something I only realized a couple years ago and was like, I would like to be more mindful of trying to get into a better space where I don't repress and push away that feeling and instead try to learn how sadness isn't this thing to be avoided, but it can actually, it's just like it is like another part of me. It deserves to exist. But even now, even knowing and reading and trying to be more open and think about how I can feel more, it is still such a strong part of my coping or my defense mechanism to even
Yes.
as Mel talks about this practice that we're not even doing right now. I'm like, oh, I got to hold on there. I don't want to lose it on camera. Like, I'm afraid I'll just like
Right?
start pouring out.
Oh,
Which I'm
I mean,
curious.
yeah.
Two things I wanted to ask Andrew about. First off, were you in a crying household? Are you a crier? Can you cry? Because I'm curious about that, and I have a follow up. But I'm curious.
No, this is actually like very surprisingly timely. Um,
Mm.
so I've been doing work on myself for the last 3 years in therapy, and the big thing was like I got so good at compartmentalizing that I could shut any emotion down and walk away from it, and it not be not be an issue at all. But so not to get super dark, but like 2 weeks ago we lost our dog of 16 years, and it was the first time that I had cried since I was 15 years old, like actually like
Wow.
released. So like I was talking to my therapist about that, and I was like, it's so weird because now like the door's been open, and I haven't quite figured, not that I want to shut it, but I haven't figured out how to shut it again. So like all of these things that I've normally had under control, I don't have under control anymore. So like there's like all this stuff seeping in, and it was funny because the way that she talked about it was like, well, if you just live in that, you sit in that, and you feel that, does it hurt you? Does it make you like, why is it so uncomfortable? And I have no answer to it right now. But no, the quick answer is no, I don't. Did not grow up in an emotional household. So it is very interesting to hear about how you bridge that gap and become mindful and work through that in a day to day, because it's not something that I've ever seen. It's never been like behavior that's been modeled for me in any way. So like my ability to find that has always been external. It has not been internal in the household.
Yeah, I would just feel Mel. I don't. So I need to know about your household from a crying standpoint now too to restore balance here. But I to just say to go with what you're saying, Andrew. I felt unsafe. So even if I technically was safe, I still feel unsafe if I allow myself to cry. And I don't want to turn this into the dog dying episode,
Yeah.
but I lost my dog, 15 years, um, this past year, and it was the same thing. Is that there was a moment there when I was like saying goodbye to him, and it just, I was really glad the
Yeah.
cat was there, and I was just like crying, like real crying, which I
Right.
just don't do. But I do think part of me, the one main reasons I've been able to identify is that I am mindful enough to know it's because I don't feel safe, even though I am. And so trying to go into that and to bridge that gap has been really interesting.
Mm.
So Mel, have you ever cried before in your life?
Yeah, that's really interesting because Well, so this is kind of AOA, going into AOA, which is the company I work for, and they do a lot of emotional work. There's the idea that like we usually titrate our emotions through a certain chief emotion. So I cry a lot, but what I have a lot of trouble with is anger. And so
Mm.
I'm really frozen in anger, and that energy usually comes out through sadness and crying. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. It's like there's different ways sometimes that emotions get expressed. Like they get squeezed through anger or grief or
Well, that's really interesting, though. You didn't always have
fear.
that self awareness. So when was it that you started to kind of piece that together? It's not like I'm assuming you didn't just always know that your anger was getting redirected through sadness.
Pretty recently, actually. Um, I was just, yeah, like this year, a lot of the work with Aletheia and AOA has been seeing how much of my emotions are like repressed and realizing that, yeah, I just like, there's not a safety in it. Like there's a similar thing because like my mom was very angry, explosively angry. And whenever I got angry back at her, it would make her even scarier. And so I learned very early on that like anger is not good. And if I'm angry, bad things will happen. And so it was this, yeah, just like slow over time, realizing like, oh, that's like it became to a point where I was almost unconscious. Like I didn't even know when I was angry. I would just feel bad because I would just repress it. And then I would like have nowhere for the energy to go. And now there's like more slow awareness of what anger even feels in my body.
And like
Like,
Alithia
oh,
is part of, like, is one of the tools that's been helping discover some of this, or that's a separate thing?
yeah. So, what Aletheia does and helps a lot with is um, kind of like turning towards the inner parts of you that are holding these emotions and creating the safety to sort of access them or like allow them to be seen or allow them to come up. Yeah.
It's funny where my, I don't know about you, Andrew, but I can even tell right now, like if I'm like really like trying to be super present and think about like where how I feel about the idea of this. It's quickly how it's surprising how quickly fear pops up, because my first like fear thought is like, how do I trust the person doing this, and what kind of accountability or guardrails are up against my person that's practicing this, because I'm like thinking about all this power that somebody potentially has when they're, you know, like trying to get you at your most like raw and vulnerable. And I'm able to kind of like see that fear and not immediately just like be like, oh, you shouldn't do this or this is bad, but kind of like look at it and be like, oh, interesting. But I imagine that that probably is something that's taken quite seriously as far as people that are practicing this. It's not just like something you just go, oh, hey, I'll go ahead and try running a session with somebody.
Yeah. It's, I think fear is definitely a, like, there are times in my sessions where I'm like, ooh, I don't know how I feel turning towards that emotion. And there's a lot of uh, like it all comes from like your internal center first, right? Like, do you feel safe? They ask you to check in with you, like with a place in your body where you feel safe to kind of reground and center you when you're going through this like inner, it really does feel like this inner imaginal kind of fantasy land type space that like your psyche creates as knobs to like hold on to. um yeah, does that make any sense?
To me, it does, because it just once again weirdly reminds me of my when I was
Your
tripping on
ketamine
ketamine.
trip.
But
Yeah.
Andrew, what about you?
I've
What about
never.
you?
The crazy thing is like everybody that I've ever talked to that's done psychedelics, be it for fun or be it for therapy, every time they talk about it, it's weird because I feel like it's how my brain just sort of like goes through the motions of everything. Like a lot of the problem that I have with like being present in the moment and all this stuff is like I'm constantly playing things out in my head. So like every conversation that I have every day, as soon as it ends, or if I know what the conversation's about before going into it, it plays out like 100% in my brain. So like when you were talking about like adjusting the knobs and all that, like I've never looked at it through the lens of, oh, I can actually control this as opposed to just being a passenger. So like my curiosity is very piqued in that way because it's always very much seemed like I'm watching something happen versus I'm like the director that can actually go in and make change to whatever that feeling or whatever that
Mm.
space may be. Um, but it's always been very vivid, like, and it's very, very much present in not necessarily anger, but like when I'm unsure of how a situation is going to be. Like if there's a lack of clarity, that's when it's the most active inside of me. It's like that anxiety, kind of like what's going to happen, where am I at, what am I doing? My brain kicks on and starts filling in all those gaps. And the gaps, like most of the time, what I fill in tends to be pretty colorful and pretty outrageous and very likely not to happen. But it always gives me this like sense of like a perfect example of that is like if I know that there's something that's going to be like a contentious conversation that I'm going to have with my wife when I get home, I have the entire argument in my head, including what her response is going to be before I get there. So then when I get there, I'm already fully resolved. Like I don't have any need to have the conversation. So then we get into the conversation. She's like, "Are you not like? Were you not?" It's like, "No, no, no. I'm good. I've done all of it. We're good. I've got my answer." And she's like, "Well, I don't." So then it makes it even worse. So I'm interested to know, like, when you find yourself being able to like identify the knobs and turn the knobs and kind of dial that in, is that with the thoughts or is that with the feelings that are coming within? Like, how far does that reach?
Mm. Um, it's That's an interesting question. It's usually feelings, with how they sort of appear. And it's interesting that you bring up like the connection with real world conversations. Um, because usually when I'm doing Aletheia or IFS, it's like internal with different parts of myself. And like sometimes they take the form of other people. Um, but it's kind of like this internal ecosystem that's happening. And yeah, I don't know. With the knobs part, it's more of like grasping what's happening inside of me as opposed to like changing it. Um, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're not necessarily in there just like able to turn down your anxiety and boost up this other thing. You're actually just more like looking at the meters and going, "Oh, this is where this is registering right now," from an observing standpoint. I have Andrew. I have you as like your own playwright, like on your drive home, setting the stage, like first act, second act, and like playing out all the conversations ahead of time so that you can be prepared for anything and already process it, and not have to deal with any of it by the time it actually happens.
100%.
And which is
100%.
which I completely relate to, and I was like so scared and getting less and less scared of just being uh, realizing it's going to be okay. It might not feel good, but something not feeling good or something being scary or something activating my nervous system or something making me feel a certain way is not the enemy. That more bad things happen actually from me just trying to like avoid all that stuff and out clever any type of situation. Not to
Right.
say that that's exactly what you're doing, but I would have the same thing. If I can just imagine every possible way that this thing can happen, and if I can figure out how to apologize ahead of time or to go ahead and already do this and to do all this stuff, then we'll skip all of the part where I feel bad and scared and unloved or unworthy or whatever it is that's coming up from childhood or whatever, and then it'll be okay. And
Right.
to turn out that actually isn't like really ideal was kind of a punch in the face. I was like, oh, well, okay. So I guess adult me has to like relearn this whole thing, but it's actually a gift. But
Yeah. And it's super exhausting.
yeah.
Like it's insane how much energy went into that and still does for me in a very real way. So, if I heard you correctly, what you were saying though earlier was that it's more about identifying as opposed to manipulating what's inside of you. And that part's super interesting to me. So it's like, are you identifying the feelings and just being very confident in that? Or are you talking like the voices that come within, identifying and assigning something to that voice?
It honestly, it depends like how they manifest. Like,
Okay.
because different parts of you have different ways of communicating. Like, for example, this part, the kind of thing that you're doing and describing in Aletheia sense, they would see that as like this is a part of you that likes to be prepared, wants to like to process things and resolve things, and so you would like sit down and work with this part and like welcome it and be like, what do you want? Um, and like what are the beliefs that this part has? And um, yeah, like just like create space for it
Yeah.
without identifying yourself with it. So it almost creates this like you're sitting in a chair with yourself and just like talking to yourself. And what I find is often that when you do that, when you just create loving space, there's like a lot of learning and um, there's just a lot of like crazy things that happen when like love is there, and usually decreases the amount of energy that that part needs to put into, because usually when there's a lot of voice talking or energy or like planning and managing that's happening, it's usually
Right.
because that part just wants to be heard and seen. um yeah.
Yo.
This this is insane because this whole conversation is very centered, very closely related to like what I was doing last week in therapy. And one of the things that she was talking to me about, which I'd never thought about it in this way, was like she was telling me, like, she's like, imagine all of your emotions and all of your states of being at any point as like your board of directors, right? And it's like, how much voice do you want to give to each one of these, and what is the intention behind each one of these quote unquote positions on that board? Like, what are they trying to do? And in my world, it was all about like protection. So it's like these protectors that come in, like when you see this like fight or flight, or like for me it was like a lot of addiction shit. So it's like, why did
Mm,
that addiction thing become so loud and become so focal in your day to day? It's like, what is it protecting you from, or what is it trying to steer you away from? So, like, hearing you talk about it like this, it's like, well, give it space, give it the ability to breathe, give it its own life, but be, respectful of it is very timely and very much needed to be heard by me. So, one, I'm super happy we're having this conversation. And it
yeah.
further proves the point that Charlie and I talk about, which is we don't need to have anything planned to go into this conversation to find some really funny or some really intense some bits. But yeah, this is incredible.
I'm gonna send you an IFS podcast, Andrew, and you can tell me how you like it afterwards. It's like what's his name? He's super popular. Tim Ferriss. I've only listened to a few of his
That's a
podcasts,
good
but
one.
our Mel and I's mutual friend Christine, when I first asked, well, how do I learn more about IFS? What is that? What's that mean? And there's a podcast where he interviews the doctor that kind of created or was well known for popularizing the process. And I was walking in my neighborhood. This is 2 years ago. I'm walking my dog and I'm listening to it, and it was the first time that I had felt like the feeling I get if like I'm high from whether it's like cannabis or like a really good like buzz from drinking or whatever. I was feeling like this high in my body from practicing as if I was being interviewed by the guy doing IFS on the podcast. Like I'd hit pause when he would like go through questions that they ask or whatever. And that did
Mm.
come mostly from a loving kindness towards a part of me that I wanted to repress or stay away from or ignore or whatever it is, whether it was anger or fear or, whatever. And I do think that it's really powerful. And for me, it's brought a sense of agency back because you were talking about being like a passenger, Andrew. And that's how I felt. I felt even more like um, weird reference, but like a pinball machine. I felt like the pinball, and you get hit, and then there's only so much you can do to control the pinball. Like maybe you can tilt the machine a little bit, and you have to press the thing at the right time. But otherwise, the pinball bounces off all of this different stuff, and like whatever happens. But yet it's like chaotic and exhausting to watch and be involved in it, and yet you very much don't have that much control. And it was like such an interesting counterintuitive thing to me that within myself to just like quiet myself and to like be open and to like acknowledge and be kind to the idea that there's parts to myself. I'm not just like one thing. Actually seemed to give a little bit more agency, and all of a sudden I didn't feel like a pinball as much. Like, well, whatever's going to happen in this conversation or whatever. Like I am just this type of person. I just in my nurture and nature has just developed this 36-year-old version of me, and if you run me through any simulation, whatever's going to happen is just that specific thing no matter what, because that's just how I'm meant to go through it, versus like slowing down and all of a sudden you have way more optionality. The better and better you get about just like observing your emotions and not having to be like taken hold by them, you know?
Yeah, my mind is
Like pinball.
yeah. No, it's just it it's weird because I'm trying like I'm really like it's taking a lot of energy right now to like
Yeah.
stay in like the conversation's blowing my mind, but it's like every time you say something, I can like feel this like wandering happening in my brain. It's like, well, what happens? And I'm like, okay, I need to come back to this and be dialed in. But no, this
Yeah,
is
see, if it
incredible.
was truly like our dinner conversation, if it was the three of us at dinner, I would just bring out a couple notebooks and some colored pencils that I had brought, and we wouldn't be like, no, we have to keep creating content. Got to stay engaged. The camera's on. I'd be like, nah, we'll edit back to it in 15 minutes. Let's draw. Let's play around. I brought some clay. Let's sing some songs.
I don't know that I've ever sang a song at dinner other than "Happy Birthday." So that's I don't know why that example came, but that's
Oh
do
man,
you do
Kat
you
just sang a
frequently
song to
sing?
me. Kat just sang a song to me last night as we are in bed, and she turns to me. She's like, "Can I sing this song to you?" And I was like, "Yes." And it was like this like song that in her mind was really romantic, and it is romantic. It's about like let's get married no matter what happens. But as she's
Wow.
singing it to me to be like romantic and sweet, it occurs to her in real time how so many of the verses are quite dark in nature, and then we're both like laughing our asses off while she's trying to seriously like serenade me with this like let's get married even if half of our property gets split up by lawyers and attorneys, but it's like saying really softly, and it's like it's like it was I'll send you the song, but it was really funny.
Please
And you
send
know what, I
that.
sing even more ever since she told me, or I don't know if Kat told me this, actually maybe I listened to it on some podcast or something, but ever since I realized like, oh, singing is also a really great way to like regulate your nervous system and to kind of like have this sense of like feeling
Yeah.
calm, because like you're doing whatever with your vocal cords, terminology that's not coming to my brain. And I was like, oh, that's why I like to sing too, because it can like just make you feel good. But yeah, next time we're at dinner, Andrew, I don't know the song yet, but I will sing to you at dinner, and then we'll see how it felt.
So when you say she sang you a song, is this a song that she wrote, or is this a song that she
Oh
felt
no,
was
I would not
applicable?
dunk on her like that. If she had written the song, I would not be. No, no, no. It's a song that she really liked, and she like wanted to sing it to me,
Okay,
to be romantic, and it was really pretty, but also like really, really funny. Yeah,
I love it.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know that I could ever find myself singing for any reason other than I make up stupid songs about shit that I'm doing around the house to
perfect.
like play it in my head, but most of them revolve around our dog or like me trying to specifically annoy Deandra. So
Oh.
they're all kind of in that world, but none of them are real songs and none of them make any sense at all. Um, and that's the only time I sing. So I'm very gun shy about this whole let's sing at dinner thing. And now I'm feeling weird and anxious about it. And you put something
It's
on
like
dinner.
it's like he's gonna be declining all my dinner invites for the next 6 months because he's just gonna imagine that I start
Like,
asking
I
him
don't
to
want to
sing at a
sing.
public restaurant.
But it's
God,
the
why
same
isn't he
thing with
inviting me?
other people too. Like one of my friends is a stand up comedian. I've never once gone to support him, and it's not because I don't support him. I would support him in any way that I can, but I physically cannot be present if I know anybody who is on the stage doing anything. Like I just can't do it. The anxiety that I get on their behalf is crippling, and I have to just leave. It's
Oh man.
horrible. So
Okay,
even
we have to
you
talk about this
singing,
now. We have to talk about this now. Well, first off,
okay,
I took my first ever voice lesson this year from a voice coach for fun for Valentine's Day because Kat wanted to do it. So we both took voice lessons, and he said I had a very nice voice. So first off, Andrew,
Oh.
you're gonna like it.
oh, I'm not.
Secondly,
It's not
though,
about liking. It has nothing to do with liking.
it's like you're worried about it. Well, okay, let me see if I can figure it out because I feel really similarly about the comedian thing. Mel, have you had any friends do stand up that you've like they've asked you to come and support, and have you been in that position where you've like gone to see somebody do stand up or been asked to?
Um. No.
I lived in New York and I had a friend, and he was actually quite good, but I had the same thing where I would just get like secondhand embarrassment or cringe or anxiety about if they bombed or if other people bombed, and watching somebody bomb in real time with like 14 people in the audience at like 6:05 p.m. on a Tuesday, and just like
Ugh.
feeling like their 5 minute set felt like an hour and a half special, and just wanting it to be over was some of the
Oh no.
worst feeling I ever had. And this is what I think is interesting to tie it back to like Aletheia or any type of meditation or practice. Crazy, probably crazy revealing, because now I feel less like that than I did 5 years ago, and I wonder what changed or what the consequence is now. That it still makes me feel a little bit whatever, but now some of these other things start to rise up in me, like good for them. Like they're getting up there and doing something that like most people will never do. And you know what, sometimes you bomb, and like is it like I still don't feel like completely different, but a lot's changed from the initial feeling of like there's nowhere I would rather stay away from than that specific setting, because I've seen it too many times and it was so painful and my whole body ached. And now it's like maybe it's this disconnection of like, or being okay with my own emotions or my own feelings or whatever, where like it's fine, like it's not as, doesn't scare me as much. But when you said that, Andrew, I was like, that is something I've specifically said multiple times to people when I lived in New York, trying to explain how I didn't want to go to comedy shows anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go.
Oh, I was like, my theory would be like, that would be my theory. It's that, uh, what we cannot contain in other people it's because we can't contain in ourselves. And so when you're unable to like love your own anxiety, if it's like coming out in someone else, then there's this like dissonance, resistance in your body that happens. And when there's less of that, then there's less of like, oh, like it doesn't need to be repressed inside
Yeah.
you.
You
Yeah,
know,
I can feel this in other ways. Like I wouldn't have felt comfortable singing as much. I wouldn't have felt comfortable dancing, and I still don't feel as comfortable as other people. But I can feel it like changing, which is really cool. Because now I'm like, yeah, you know what? I will. Let's go to that dancing event, Kat. Whereas like a younger version of me would have been like, I will come up with the most romantic other million options. I will be like so inventive and cool with all these different quality times things. Just don't have me be in a situation where I have to dance in public. That's like my only ask, right? And then like thinking about this as I've like grown, and these things are changing with me, I'm like, man, that's actually way more interesting now, because if I can find such a thing to create such an extreme revulsion or emotion or whatever in me, now that's actually something really worth kind of maybe like tapping into and
Yeah.
thinking
It's like a
about, instead of
trailhead.
just
yeah.
like a trailhead. What a beautiful way to actually say that. Damn.
Yeah, that's an IFS term. It's like whatever is triggering you, whatever is bringing up a really strong emotion in you. That's usually something that wants to be loved and hasn't been loved, and just wants some attention. It's like it's great actually. You could look forward
And
to being triggered.
yeah,
Yeah.
and actually even just, and I know that even for myself, actually just like dancing without caring about perception is like one of the life's like most wonderful gifts, right? To just dance. Um, well, I don't know how we ended up talking about all this. Do you dance, Andrew?
No, I mean, to annoy my wife, yes, but for any other point to bring joy, no. Um,
You will
but I
sing for
need to.
her. You'll dance for her if it's at the cost of her sanity. Got it.
For her to cringe is my like, that's my like, I don't know, it lights my fire in a way that I can't explain. But it's like, it's not, I can't get to the point where like, I'm actually pissing her off, and I miss that mark a lot. But for me, the best part is when it's just like she's like almost laughing but kind of annoyed. Like that little sweet spot is my moving target 24/7.
Um, well, this was a really interesting, all these fun, beautiful tangents that kind of came out of just asking questions about like, so wait, what's this practice? But I am curious, just to hear, to kind of like wrap it up in a satisfying way for myself, at least, like as we talk about how you kind of like have been practicing it, or how you've become a proponent of it. Um, is this something that you would generally recommend people try? Is it something that you see yourself continuing to do? I mean, when she's being really modest, Andrew, when she says that she was writing this newsletter, she actually had you know, thousands of people, like people loved what she was writing, and it was really researched and really great. And you're very, very smart, and you know a lot. Often you have like the journalist researcher part of you where you care. You're not. You're like you have immaculate vibes, and you're great at being present, and you have great energy. But I think that some people like might then not realize that underneath all that actually is somebody that is like paying attention, and detailed, and like will do all the research. And it's kind of a cool combination to have both of those in somebody. So when we're living during this time where there's, like you said, there's all the psychedelics, somebody like me who in a million years would have never said yes to something called ketamine assisted therapy, like would be terrified of it. You have somebody like me having done it, right? So like so much stuff is happening. Obviously, there's all types of apps, AI is doing therapy, whatever. There's so many different things out there. It becomes interesting to have spent so much time talking about one specific like modality or whatever. And I'm just curious, amongst all these
Yeah.
other things, if this is something that, yeah, that you recommend other people try or see yourself doing more of. Like, where is it taking place among the other practices and things that you've done for self-knowledge or self-care?
Mhm. Number one, thank you so much for saying that. Like, I really appreciate it. Number two, I'm actually doing a certification, like coaching for Aletheia. So it's going to become very bedrocky, I think, for me. I really think that they've just like married all the best parts of psychology and spirituality together in this like really beautiful way where they fill in the gaps for each other, like meditation stuff, um, ideas from like Buddhism and Taoism, and then IFS stuff. And what I think is the most beautiful concept they had, which I'm glad you asked because it's so important. Their philosophy is all about self unfolding and discovery instead of self improvement. Um, because self improvement can become this thing where you're like not good enough. Like you're trying to improve yourself in order to become worthy or valuable. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's all about like the intention and frame with which you come from it. It's like, am I doing these things because I want to, and because like I genuinely authentically feel like that's who I am and what I want to do, or am I doing it because someone is telling me that this is what I should do in order to be good enough, in order to like have value as a human. And so in terms of like that frame and intention, I think that would be a really powerful thing for anyone to apply to like every modality, just as that as a frame of like, I am whole, I am complete, like I'm unfolding myself like an onion as opposed to like on this staircase to nowhere. That's kind of like the metaphor I would compare Aletheia to the like wider self help paradigm. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, like I think trying it would be awesome.
Well, I'm going to throw
Um,
out a hypothetical that we can return to in the future or not, which is when you're certified. Very similar to how
oh yeah,
I couldn't believe Tim Ferriss doing an IFS session with a doctor and then recording it, and him being like, "Screw it, I'll just actually I'll try to be really present and really vulnerable, and actually just really try to answer these questions as if so that somebody else might be affected by it," which I had no idea what any of that stuff was. And all of a sudden, like just a random person that turned on the podcast, I'm like feeling things and being like, I want to study and learn this more because this person was willing to showcase how this works. So, hypothetical, I think, Andrew or I, we might surprise you, might say like, oh, why don't we try try letting you do a practice on video possibly in the future, showcase
hell
to other
yeah.
people like the value in it. I did want to share a story because I have this question about this unfolding thing, and Andrew or Mel, you guys both might have a similar story, but there's where you hear one term or one fragment of something, and you kind of quickly jump to your understanding of it, whether or not it's actually the source creator's understanding, but it like takes a firm hold in your mind, and that becomes like the way you understand it. And my example of this is Malcolm Gladwell. God, I hope I'm right about this, but it's fine if I'm not. He said like one of his great failings was like his book Blink, because he wanted to write like his nonfiction book with like a novel type flow where it was like a little bit unpredictable and had a sense of like movement, but people didn't take it that way. And so when he talks at the beginning about like how there's all these cases for just trust your gut, just thin slice things in your life. Don't think too much about it. Like, what do your instincts tell you? Like, that's what you should do. And comes up with cases where that like saved people's lives, or where it was like a really great
Mm.
business decision. But the book's pretty long for like a Gladwell book, you know, like usually think of like, I'll pick it up in the airport. There'll be like 8 or 9 short chapters with good stories and I'll be done. But I think it's one of his longer ones. And if you power through, which I did when I read it, you then see it start to turn and show where actually humankind, sometimes if you just went by that logic, I'll always thin slice, I'll just always trust my immediate instinct, it can get you killed and it can bankrupt a company and it can do all these things, which makes way more sense, right? There's gonna be a ton of different options from just telling somebody no matter what, trust your gut. But he said like the greatest failure was writing in the way he did, and it being like an airport bestseller like fueled all of this like popular zeitgeisty sentiment, you know, especially in the business world where people were just like making decisions and using him as this like pop psych
Oh
evidence
gosh.
for it. And I love that he had the humility to kind of look at that as a failing and to think about that. But then I think about it too, and I think of like unfolding, because I'm like, all I had to hear was like unfolding. And I'm like, God, I've lived so much of my life, even though I think of myself as like a very kind, optimistic, loving person, I've held so much stress. And I always think of it as like my fist is always as tight as it can be, like really, really tight. And all my moments of like euphoria have been when I found some way to like unfold my hand
Mm.
and all of a sudden like let go and just realize it's okay or whatever. And then I was thinking about how I wanted to completely not know anything about Aletheia and be like, I'm so in because I'm so in on unfolding, even though I have no idea what really unfolding means. So I was like, wait a minute, I want to ask Mel, just I need like probably 90 seconds on the term unfolding before I go and like pull like this like, you know, uh Fortune 500 C-suite Gladwell interpretation of what it means to me to unfold, because it's like such a good word. It's like a buzzy. It's like I can feel the buzziness of the word, you know.
Mm. It is like, yeah, it is a really, they chose a really good word to replace improvement with. Um, yeah, I mean, I would repeat a little bit of what I was saying before. It's like improvement is this like staircase, unfoldment is like this idea that you at your essence is like complete and whole, and all you need to do is remove what's standing in the way of that essence, like kind of like unpeel those parts. That's where the IFS comes in, because where those parts kind of like take control because they think they need to. It's this idea of like surrender is like not the best word, because in the past it depends what you're surrendering to, but it's kind of like that. It's like a surrendering and trusting that, you know, like you at your core know what to do. um, and it's like it's also more nuanced than that, because um, yeah, like sometimes it's not like 100% clear what your essence is, and then that's kind of the question. It's like living in the question of what is you, and that kind of puts you in that place of you. Now we're getting into non-dualism and everything.
But it's good though because it's revealing a little bit of like the importance of having like a certified, prepared instructor that knows what they're doing. Because I could see
Yes.
how in some ways I would be a little bit worried about what I might, you know, what could happen in front of me if I'm not necessarily trained and somebody's like, you know, engaging with parts of themselves or emotions that otherwise they're not used to or something, you know.
Yeah, like there definitely is a need for a safe container. Yeah.
Like a responsibility that you're going to be taking on here, which probably is questions I'll end up asking you when you're finished the certification, is like, what's that actually look like? How do you build trust? How do you ensure safety with people, asking some people to do something that their body tells them they absolutely should not do, you know?
Mm. I mean, that's definitely, you would ideally never be doing that. If your body's like telling you you absolutely should not be doing, there's never like a push. It's always like, can you? And you decide like yes or no. And you can always say no. So it's
That's
what
good
like,
context.
it's what like you want and feel comfortable with. Yeah. Just want to
Um,
clarify that.
no, I think that's smart. I would say as a as we kind of wrap up this conversation of Alithia, I want to give Andrew any space he has to ask any last questions or curiosities about that, or any other questions he has in general from meeting you for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is so
But I would
fun.
say that with when I did the ketamine assisted therapy, that the big realization, the big like oomph of it was that like I was like clean, I was good, I was pure, like there was a goodness at the source of everything was okay. Like everything was deeply fine and I didn't need to avoid or change or any of that. All that stuff was just gone. And then when you kind of come out of it, there's like a whatever the good word is for a hangover, like a positive hangover that can
Like a
stay with some
glow.
people. Yeah, like a glow that can stay with some people for a week, 2 weeks, a month sometimes, and then kind of
Yeah.
fades away. And the thing that I remember talking to my therapist about was like we were thinking like as a toolkit, ketamine is not some like it's not meant to be this miracle drug that changes you forever. It's meant to try to show you that you can get back to that place without needing to use drugs. And same thing, like I was on SSRIs. I didn't want to be on SSRIs forever. In fact, when I got off SSRIs, which took a while, and I finally got off SSRIs after like 2.5 years of being on them, I was like reminded that I could cry and I could like feel like emotion about like Pixar movies again. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that I hadn't until I was off them. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like feeling these emotions or whatever.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that's what I like about what you said that I feel really resonant with is like it's there. And so when you're unfolding and you're thinking about what are some of these things that are just in the way of me recognizing and seeing and feeling that actually everything I am good, everything's okay. I really like that.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. It's like you are that love, that awareness, that source, and it's helping you unfold what isn't there. Get
Yeah,
back
you
to
know what?
that
If it's
place.
if it's if it's like woo to say that like I am love and I care about being loved, then I am like just sign me up for like
Yeah.
full on
All
woo,
aboard
man.
the woo train.
I'm all about the love now, dude. I'm all about the love. Um, Andrew, any curiosities or questions about any of this?
Definitely, I think curiosity is definitely the bigger one. But the two words that kept coming into my brain that I couldn't get out ever since we got to this part of the conversation was permission and morality. And
Mm,
I heard this, somebody said it at some point, it stuck with me, and I can't get it out of my head ever. And it says, it's to ask yourself the question, like, what is the morality of the information that you seek? Like, why are you seeking that information? For what purpose? I mean, when you were talking about that, like the self work side of it, like going inside, figuring out how to unfold yourself, the permission piece keeps coming up for me. So it's like, for me, it's like, if I, what's the morality of me doing this work or trying to find this work? And am I doing it for the right reason? And if I don't, would I still give myself the permission to do it, knowing that the benefit will outweigh the maybe, you know, darker, immoral thought that got me to that point in the first place, if that makes sense.
Hmm. What makes um doing this work or what would make doing the work immoral?
Like I would say, like if you're doing it like in like a van, like the in through the lens of like vanity, through the lens of like I'm gonna make myself better so I can tell people that I'm better. And the only reason
Mm.
that that part comes into my head at all is because there's always that stigma of like if you work on yourself in my brain. And I think I said this actually on the Pranab episode, which is like my brain is wired for hospitality and for service and to always be in service of others. So if I'm then turning that onto myself and I'm being of service to myself, my core is now being jeopardized as to what it is that I'm doing in that space. So that's where I think the selfish and the word selfishness, the word, vanity, all of those words start echoing in my brain. So that's where the word morality came in when it's like, what's the purpose of seeking that information? What's the purpose
Mm.
of unfolding? And will I be able to give myself the permission to do it, even if the initial reason may not be the best?
What I have found, I think that's a really good point and question. And what I have found is that the deeper I go into this work, the more loving I am to everyone I am around me. Like I become a so much more loving, and that love like seeps out. And so, one thing my coach always says is like one of the best ways to help other people is to help yourself be that core like loving essence awareness. um so yeah, it's that's the way that um that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about like the morality and permissioning. Yeah.
I really love that. I have something similar I want to share, which is this idea of self love being such a popularized term everywhere, like all over TikTok, Twitter, just in pop culture. And it just kind of made me itchy. Like couldn't feel comfortable with self love. I didn't like it for a while, and it wasn't until I read somebody kind of change the context of it, of like, if you think of a parent, mother or father, like, tucking in a kid and putting them to sleep at the right bedtime earlier than they want to go to sleep, and thinking about what they're eating and the kind of food and vegetables they're having, or that they're crying, and instead of yelling at them to stop crying or else, you ask them how they're feeling, and you check in with them, and you're like with them, and try to like really give them a space to feel their emotions. And you think about all these things that you think of. I never thought about thinking of that as self-love. I only kind of thought of self-love as that term as kind of same thing, like vanity, ego, like just giving myself more attention, and that just felt wrong. And then that switch was so powerful, because I was like, I have to be the person that's taking care of me. I have to like be my parent, and that's an expression of love, to now be thinking about myself in that way. And the more that I've learned to do that, to create this love for myself, to treat myself as I would want to like take care of me, vanity goes down, wanting to tweet about it, or wanting to have a huge audience and brag, or it's just it becomes less of what's happening. And even like when the ketamine thing happened, the most interesting thing about being at deep inner peace, feeling full relaxation, feeling completely fine about everything, was that also like lack of ego and vanity was not there at all. Just love, and like just love in like this sense. I mean, I'm on video, it's gonna be hard for somebody on a podcast, but just like this like deep like bodily like just love. I'm yelling to the microphone to get it, but like just leaning back and just like I'm good, which I think is very different from, you know, uh, please tell me you love me. Please recognize that I'm getting better. Please give me lots of validation, because like I don't actually need any of that stuff, because I'm full and I am whole, and out of that abundance, out of that finally feeling enough, finally feeling like I'm enough, love pours out to those around me, because you realize there's like this healthy, abundant source of love that's inside of us, but it's really easy for that to get like, I think, clogged up in all these different ways. And so it becomes interesting when a good friend of mine says, oh well, there's this practice that I'm really getting into that in some ways is helping me unclog or move out and learn how to practice getting to that space more regularly, having more of a handle on how to find that love that's always there. So I don't know if any of that lands at all, but I just wanted to kind of relate to you, Andrew, that I had that same, or at least in my
Yeah.
mind, to what you're saying, similar feeling of like a repulsion or rejection to some of the feelings I would feel when people would use terminology like self-love.
Right. No, it totally lands. I mean, I totally get it. I do have one last question for both of you that I think is a little on the lighter side. But both of you said self love, and then as the more you accept it, the more it comes out. The more that you extend that gratitude, that grace, that whatever to others. And I'm going to demand brutal honesty. Does that still happen in traffic when you get cut off and you're riding somebody? And I mean, it's just in the throes. I mean, I know you're in LA, so traffic's miserable. But road rage, does that kind of cancel out road rage? I gotta
Do you want
know.
me? I, it's what that is. I'm gonna give like the least satisfying answer to you, Andrew, because I'm being like nerdy about it. I've just never had road rage to begin with, even when I didn't do any like inner work or any whatever, And I think actually that's more telling of my conflict avoidance and my fear of bad things happening if I allow myself to get angry, or if I defend myself, or if I give the finger to somebody. And so I wanted to be a people pleaser and keep everything okay. So I think it's probably more revealing of that. If anything, it'd probably be more successful to know that I honked the horn in like a self-righteous protecting way. So
Right.
unfortunately, anecdotally, I'm not a great person to ask about that. But the question underneath your question is, yes, that the more self acceptance I have, the more that does create grace for other people, but not in some magical way where like no matter what anybody does to me now, I'm just like always like, oh no, it's all good, it's vibes. Like, no, that's crazy. We're human. But for sure, from like if I was gonna get data nerd about it and like track things, it's got to be way down. Because the more that I accept myself, I feel like in generally, like the more accepting I can be of other people.
I think you actually bring up a good point because when people hear love, there's often this misconception that that means always being nice and kind, when the truth is that love and compassion can be like a very sharp sword. Like love is telling someone the truth, even if it means that you risk the relationship. So it doesn't apply as much to the road rage thing. Like the most loving people can scream all they want. Like loving your anger is a form of love too. As long as you're not projecting it at someone, like expressing your emotion, allowing that anger out like in a sacred way and seeing that anger is a protector. Anger is a form of love as well. In a healthy form. So yeah, there's like many expressions of love, and it's not always this like I am the light and everything is welcome here and like everyone is beautiful, like. So I think that's a really good qualification to say like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I love
love
it.
flows out, but it isn't this like all-consuming golden light.
Right.
Yeah, which wouldn't be interesting if it was.
No,
You know.
Yeah.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
This was really wonderful. I know we have a hard stop for you, Andrew. Any last thoughts or anything that you wanted to comment at all, Mel, before we wrap it up?
I just wanted to thank you both so much for like setting this up. I had a ton of fun and yeah, this is super inspiring because I also want to start doing more pods and yeah, I'm very inspired. I love that you guys came into this with no prep. Like
I'm
this
going
was
to
an
create
awesome
such good
conversation.
edits and clips for you that you can use
Oh
for
my
all the things.
gosh.
And
Yes.
I do just want to, I would like to say this one last thing before I hit stop. And Andrew, I know you have to go, which is that a big motivating factor for me to go ahead and say, yes, Andrew, let's go ahead and do this thing because you had this idea to do this, but I was being resistant to it. A big motivating factor was that Mel just tweeted like, yo, anybody out there want to do like video content or trying to do video content? And I was like, you know what? Yeah. I like Mel so much that if Mel is like saying they're going to try to get over this hurdle that they have and get in front of video and do stuff, then I would do it too if I was going along with somebody. And if people are listening to the very end, they can really probably hear it in my voice, just like actual, just real, sincere gratitude for getting me out of my own way and extending your hand to say, and not to just me, but to a ton of other people that reached out and said, hey, let's create together and let's
Mm,
get out of our own way and have fun and create and use community as an inspiring tool to get us to create and have conversations. So like truly thank you, Mel.
thank you, Charlie. I
Let's see if I can
appreciate you
get the
so much.
see.
Get the
I don't
heart.
get the hearts when I do it. I don't. It's fine. I put for podcast listeners. I put my hands up with the heart symbol, and see she gets hearts again, and I don't get it. So all right, this was so great. Thank you both so much for being open and vulnerable, especially around somewhat kind of heavier
Yeah.
conversation. I really enjoyed it, and we're gonna talk again, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
So thank
I'm
you.
super excited. Thank you so much. This was incredible. Had a blast, and I'm looking forward to doing this in person soon.
Yes.
Hell yeah. Dinner.
Please.